All right, welcome. Today, we're going to jump in a time machine and head back to 2016. It was a fascinating time when the world's biggest banks, facing a serious crisis, looked to a pretty wild place for a savior, the radical tech behind Bitcoin.
So that's the big question, right? Why on earth would an industry that's all about centralized control, about being the trusted person in the middle, suddenly get excited about a technology literally designed to get rid of middlemen? It sounds kind of crazy, but back in 2016, there were some very good reasons for this huge bet. Okay, so to really get why they did this, you first have to understand the incredible pressure the whole banking industry was under. And it wasn't just one thing. It was a perfect storm of problems, both inside and out, that had everyone scrambling for a lifeline.
First up, the squeeze they were feeling internally. Profits were, well, they were tanking. Big picture economic stuff and changing interest rates were shrinking the profits banks had relied on for decades. To put it simply, the old ways of making money just weren't working as well anymore.
And if that wasn't bad enough, it gets worse. While profits were falling, risk was going up. The amount of non-performing assets, loans that are in danger of not being paid back, was on the rise. So think about it. Banks are making less money, and the money they do have out there is getting riskier. That is not a good look.
So while the banks are dealing with all that drama internally, a huge threat was building up on the outside. This was the big internet finance boom, what we'd now call FinTech 1.0. And these new tech companies, they were not playing by the same old rules.
So how are these startups completely outmaneuvering the big banks? Well, for one, they built their own systems for payments and credit. They created these amazing all-in-one platforms that could reach customers everywhere, on every device. But here's the real kicker. They wove finance right into everyday life, making it totally seamless. And if you want to know just how big this problem was for the banks, get this. By the middle of 2016, a whopping 87% of internet users in China were already using these new finance platforms. This wasn't some tiny trend. This was a full-blown customer exodus. So, your profits are down, your risk is up, and your customers are leaving. What do? Just building a better banking app wasn't going to cut it. They needed a fundamental change. So their big idea was to leapfrog the competition by grabbing onto the next big thing, FinTech 2.0, all powered by blockchain.
And this is the key difference you have to understand. FinTech 1.0 was all about the user experience, the apps and the websites. It was a revolution in how we use finance. But FinTech 2.0, the promise of blockchain, that was about changing the very plumbing, the deep down underlying technology of how finance actually works. And this right here, this is the aha moment. When you put the old system, the new internet guys, and the blockchain idea side by side, the difference is just, wow. Across the board. Efficiency, cost, safety. Blockchain looked like a massive upgrade. It promised direct, point-to-point transactions, shared ledgers, which just means everyone has the same synchronized record, and way better security. On paper, it was the perfect weapon. Okay, so enough with the theory. What could this perfect weapon actually do? Well, the first, and maybe the most obvious, target was the super slow and expensive world of payments. I mean, the difference is just staggering. Sending money overseas could take up to 3 days, bouncing between all these different banks. But with blockchain systems being tested at the time, that same payment could be done in about 10 seconds. That's not just an improvement. That's a whole different reality. And it wasn't just about speed. A report from back then figured that blockchain could chop the cost of sending money across borders from an average of $26 down to just $15. Now, that might not sound like a ton, but when you're doing millions of these every day, yeah, those savings add up fast. Next up on the hit list, trade finance. This is one of the oldest, most paper-heavy parts of banking. It's all about financing goods as they move around the world, and boy, was it ready for a change. The old way of doing things, with stacks of paper and letters of credit, could take a week, maybe 10 days. But then, in September 2016, Barclays did the world's very first trade deal on a blockchain. And the result? The whole thing was done in under 4 hours. The potential prize for cracking this was just enormous. Some estimates suggested that using blockchain for just supply chain finance could save banks up to $15 billion a year in costs. With a number like that on the table, you can see why everyone was so excited. But, of course, it wasn't nearly that simple. You couldn't just plug in the tech behind Bitcoin and call it a day. It wasn't a magic bullet. It came with a whole new set of headaches, practical and even philosophical challenges that the industry had to face. And this really gets to the core of the problem. The entire banking system is built on centralized trust. You trust your bank. But blockchain's whole philosophy is based on decentralized, trustless systems. So, can you really slam those two worlds together? Or are they just fundamentally incompatible? Well, the industry's answer was basically to create a compromise. They weren't really interested in public blockchains like Bitcoin, where anyone can join. Instead, they focused on what are called consortium blockchains, where only a select group of approved institutions could participate. Think of it like a private club using decentralized tech. So the realistic outcome wasn't that banks were going to disappear. Instead, their role was going to change. One source put it this way: a multi-center, weakly intermediated scenario is likely to emerge. What does that even mean? Well, basically, banks would go from being the center of the financial universe to being just one of many important hubs in a more distributed network. And the final massive hurdle was regulation. I mean, finance is one of the most heavily regulated industries on the planet. So how do you apply those old rules to a new technology that's distributed, self-governing, and crosses borders in an instant? It was a giant headache for regulators everywhere. One of the cleverest solutions that came up was the idea of a regulatory sandbox. Think of it like a safe playground. It's a controlled space where companies could test out these new blockchain ideas with real customers, but with regulators watching over their shoulder, making sure nothing blew up the whole system. So let's pull this all together. Back in late 2016, even with all these huge obstacles, the feeling was incredibly optimistic. The general belief was that, yeah, these are tough problems, but the technical, the regulatory, the security issues, they would all get solved eventually. The idea of blockchain becoming a core part of the banking industry didn't just seem possible, it felt like it was right around the corner. And that leaves us with one last really important question to think about. That was the vision in 2016. So look around you. How much of that future are we actually living in right now?